Hello, welcome to the latest episode of the Retirement Cafe podcast, which is sponsored by My Financial Planner. Not knowing when you can afford to retire or what your pensions will provide can be worrying. My Financial Planner provides independent, fixed-fee retirement planning advice, bringing clarity to your financial future. At My Financial Planner, we build a financial plan for your retirement and equip you with the knowledge to implement the plan and buy any products or financial investments that you need yourself. Find out more about getting a plan to fund the retirement that you really want at myfinancialplanner.co.uk. On the podcast today, I'd like to share with you my conversation with author, photographer, and retired lawyer Mark Shaiken. This is the second episode in our series, The Story of Their Lives. Mark spent nearly 4 decades working in law, but not intentionally. He studied law at college to give him 3 more years to consider what he really wanted to do. Having not come up with any better ideas, Mark did become a lawyer. He then spent 40 years planning an exit. Eventually, Mark realized that thinking about retiring from the law wasn't productive. So instead, Mark thought about what he wanted to retire to. In his book, and just like that, Essays on Life Before, During and After the Law, and in our conversation, Mark shares his story of deciding to move on to what he calls the next season of life. He explains why coaching support was so important in helping him transition successfully. So as a coach myself, registered life planner, and a trainer with the Kinder Institute, Mark was preaching to the converted. I've seen firsthand on many occasions how beneficial coaching is for people of all ages going through a major transition in life. So it was great to hear how this really helped Mark. So without further delay, let's get into my conversation with Mark. So welcome to the Retirement Cafe podcast, Mark Shaiken.
Thank you, Justin, for having me. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Now, for those who don't know you, Mark, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your quite fabulous career, and also where you're from?
I am coming to you from Denver, Colorado, in the United States. I grew up in Queens, and then Long Island, and then Connecticut, and then all over the place.
Oh.
Yeah. I was a lawyer for some 38 and a half years, licensed in 5 different states. Here in the States, you get licensed by each state. And then about a year ago, no more law. So a good portion of my pre-law career life and my law career was spent trying to figure out what I would do. So I never stopped thinking about what my path was going to be. Even as I was going to law school, that wasn't my view of my destiny. When I was taking the exams to get licensed and during my career, I just always seemed to come back to that question. So what is my path in life? I went to law school not to be a lawyer. I went to law school because I needed 3 more years, I thought, after college to figure out what I would do. I was a little slow on the uptake, so that 3 years turned into another 38 after that to try to figure out what I would do.
Wow.
But I did figure it out finally, and I left the practice of law last year and sort of started my second season of life. And I'm in the not-for-profit world, helping people daily, and feeling pretty good about it.
Great. So, I'm just adding that up, Mark, 40 odd years of law and going to college in your kind of 18 to 20, you must be in your early 60s. That's an awful long time, maybe doing a career that was it fulfilling for you, or was it your passion?
At times it was fulfilling. It was never my passion, or I guess looking back, if it ever was my passion, that passion certainly dulled. And it just became the thing I was doing because I couldn't figure out what else I could do. One of the things about being an attorney is you start to, or at least I did, but I think many attorneys have the same struggle that I did. You start to question whether there is anything else you can do. And start to convince yourself, well, the reason I got into the law business is that was the only thing I could do.
Right.
There's this phrase from one of the Supreme Court justices here in the United States that the phrase is, the law is a jealous mistress. And she is. She takes much of your life because it's an all-encompassing career with lots of stress and a lot of high stakes things are going on for clients. And, you end up struggling to find some balance. And the mistress wins a lot. She contests quite well the lawyer's individual need to find some balance in life. And that struggle, for whatever reason, tends to leave the practicing lawyer, at least I did. I was left that way, wondering maybe there isn't anything else I can do. And you start thinking of retiring as you get into your 60s, and I'm about to turn 65. And you get to that phase of life, and you wonder, is this all there is? And you start to think about retiring, and I found that to be not the right mindset for me. Rather than retiring from the law, what started to be much more productive for me was to try to figure out, if I was to retire, I want to retire to something.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to sit at home and watch the television. I want to be busy. I just don't want to go to court and talk to judges and partners and clients and opposing counsel.
And you mentioned in your book, which we'll come to a little bit later, but you mentioned in your book you don't like the word retire.
I don't, which I realize is not maybe what you want to say on the Retirement Cafe. But when I say that, I say it tongue in cheek. But when I say that, what I think of is my dad. When he retired, he sat in front of the TV, waiting to die, and then eventually, of course, did pass away. I don't want to do that. As long as I'm healthy, I'm happy to be busy. But I want, in the second season of my life, to be much more intentional about what I'm busy about doing. And so far, it's worked out quite well. Yeah.
Yeah. So just before we get to kind of the future, this second stage of life, as you've mentioned, if you could go back to, with your wisdom now after 40 odd years of law, and go back to that 20-year-old something Mark, who's embarking and trying to work out where his path is, what his passion is, what he should be doing with his life, what would you say to him?
That's an excellent question. A person does spend a fair amount of time, especially as they plow into the 60s, reflecting and looking back on their life and wondering, so you come to a fork in the road, I went left, what would have happened if I took the right path? I went to a great college. So that part of my life, I was incredibly lucky to have gone to Haverford College. But Haverford, like so many liberal arts schools, isn't really there to help you figure out what your career is going to be. It's a great place to get an education. The placement office was fairly small or non-existent. I think what I would have done is I would have spent a little bit more time in college trying to think of careers to do rather than jumping into the things that I jumped into. So I jumped into, I need money. So I jumped into painting lines on the highway. You can tell my lines are the ones that aren't straight. And so that wasn't really going to cut it. I spent time driving a forklift after college. So I went to this very Tony collegiate institution. And then I ended up driving a forklift, on the graveyard shift, and didn't do that particularly well either. And I just sort of careened. And I did sit down and talk with a lawyer, because my family didn't have any lawyers in it and didn't really know any lawyers. But I talked to one, and my luck, this person was incredibly passionate about his practice of law. And I wasn't buying it, but I thought I would explore it, and did. but it's really hard to come up with this is what I should have done, and I don't find that healthy. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas can make you depressed sometimes, and so I really haven't spent a lot of time saying there was that moment that I misstepped.
Oh.
I wasn't going to go to med school. I might have been able to go into business, perhaps, but I ended up in law school, like so many.
Though I mean, I reflect on the humor that you wrote your book, which is just called "And Just Like That: Essays on a Life Before, During, and After the Law." And you had some challenging times, you had some fun times. There's some humor in there, and I suppose a reflection, of course, what it's allowed you to do is to embark on this stage of your life with vigor and energy, and with vitality, and obviously with some funds behind you to really explore what you can do next.
Correct. At a pre-COVID cocktail party or two, as people heard I was writing the book, they were surprised, curious, and wondered, well, what did you get out of your law career? And I think what I got out of my law career was the law taught me how to not be a lawyer anymore when the time came. And I think I've done that part quite well, at least to my satisfaction.
Tell me more about that. What do you really mean by it taught you not to be a lawyer any longer?
It's such an intense thing to do that when the time came to not do it anymore, I don't miss it. I don't look back. There's a few months after I stopped being a lawyer or retired from the law profession, one of my friends at the law firm took me out to lunch, and in all seriousness looked at me and said, "Okay, now that you've finished this wild hair sabbatical of 3 months, are you coming back?" And no, I'm not coming back. I like what I do now, and I don't see myself coming back. I can't imagine what the event would be that would cause me to come back to the law. And during the COVID era, as tragically so many businesses are failing here in the States, the bankruptcy practice has shot dramatically up, which is what happens during any economic recession. It's a practice area that thrives off of the misfortunes in the economic world. And I've had a number of clients that have called and have said, you're missing the next bankruptcy wave. And my response is one word: happily. I'm okay with that. I had my waves, and it's time to let other people deal with the waves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what I mean. You do it intensely, and then no regrets as you move on.
And so when you started thinking about this idea of leaving law, and we'll call it retire, but I appreciate that. And from our perspective at the Retirement Cafe is that we know that retirement's it's not a purely financial event. This is the opportunity. We want people to embrace it and to live it into it with vigor and passion, and to be curious about the things that they didn't have the opportunity to do when work overtook them sometimes, not always, but a lot of the times. But when you first started, mulling it over in your mind, and did you talk to your wife, Lauren, and your son, Zach, about this next transition, and how did they feel, if you did?
Well, I went through so many midlife crises, probably starting in my mid to late 30s and going from there forward, that when I started getting better about the notion of how to structure a move from the law to something else, I didn't talk to them that much. I had already driven them crazy over the 20 or 30 years of the contemplation of things I could do. Or not do, that I started off not talking to them. But what I did do is I moved away from the notion that I need to leave the law because I've had enough, sort of a negative thought process, to I need to do things that will make me feel good at the end of every day and that I'm passionate about. What are those things? And that, surprisingly, that was a very big change in my own mindset. And when I did that, which was about a year and a half before I told the firm that I was going to retire, then I did read my wife into those thoughts, and that did not drive her crazy. To know that I wouldn't be sitting at home with the remote control was a relief, I think, to her. And and she's a veterinarian, so she loves what she does. She's continued to do that. Um, and many people have said, now that you're not a lawyer anymore, are you driving her crazy? And the answer is not really, because I get up and I go out and I do my thing and I get home like I had a regular job. So I'm not there to drive her crazy. But I didn't bother her with a lot of the what I'll call unproductive intermediary thinking about this, because I love her and I don't want to drive her crazy.
So take me through the thought process then. So you've decided that you're going to leave law. You decided you're going to get out. How are you going to work out what you're going to do, what's going to be productive, and what's going to fulfill you? What was the process that you went through there?
One of the most meaningful quotes in my life is something that Winston Churchill said, and I'm not going to be able to quote it exactly, but to paraphrase, while you might measure a career by what you get, you measure a life by what you give. And I always had that in my head. I heard that in college, and it was there as sort of a goal, because this jealous mistress that's the law makes it very difficult to then have this other part of your life where you feel like you're out there giving things. You know, are you building homes for people through Habitat for Humanity? Are you helping inner city kids so that they can be as lucky as you were and finish high school and get on to college? And those are time consuming. And those are the things I do like. And it wasn't that hard for me to start to identify the things I wanted to do. I did have some help with a professional, a career coach, who really hadn't ever done this for lawyers. This company had done this for executives of companies who, middle level or high level executives who reached the end of their career either voluntarily or involuntarily. And they were very skilled at helping me focus and have more intentionality in the thought process, which I'd never had before. I was sort of scatterbrained about it. But they had never done it for a lawyer. And I wondered if they would do it for a lawyer, because I wasn't really an executive at a business, and whether they could live through the experience of doing it for a lawyer, because after 41 years in the law, you're a little different perhaps than you were 41 years ago. But they were great. I talked about the work for Habitat, and they helped me get on the finance and audit committee for Habitat. I'm not really able to build houses anymore physically, but I can help. I got involved with one arts organization. I'm on the board now, vice chair, who brings art to the inner city school systems within the state of Colorado, which is amazing. And then I teach photography through a third organization to returning veterans who have PTSD or traumatic brain injury, and use photography as a method for them to both find a skill and hopefully kind of turn off the noise that PTSD creates in a person's brain. And, all of those things, I can come home after a long day of doing any of those and be pretty happy with myself.
Mm. So tell me how you got, what was the passion behind the Habitat thing?
I always felt like I grew up in the inner city, which I talk about in the book. And I always felt like it was incredibly lucky that I was able to graduate from high school and get into this great college. I always, there's a part of the book where I recount the story. I always thought the school made a mistake when they let me in, and that I, have been waiting 40 plus years for that letter from Dean Potter that said it was a terrible mistake. If you just send back your diploma, we'll call it even. But I was lucky, very lucky. And the things that I've sort of landed on, other than the Veterans Project, all have sort of the same idea. And that is, if you can put people into a home, a family, um, you dramatically increase the odds that the kids in that family will graduate from high school, stay out of a gang, and go to college. And so if you want to solve the drug problem, solve the housing problem. If you want to solve the education problem, solve the housing problem, and the gang problem, solve the housing problem. And it is jaw dropping, the statistical difference between an inner city kid that doesn't have a stable home and what happens versus an inner city kid that the family gets into a house.
Yeah.
And what happens to the kid's path. And I was lucky, and I hope that I can impart some of that luck to some of the kids coming up through the ranks now.
So Habitat's the charity, isn't it? Yeah.
Habitat for Humanity is an international charity that it's all over the world. They build houses, and then they put families into the house. The families have to put in, quote, sweat equity. So they have to give Habitat some 200 hours of volunteer work themselves. That kind of brings them into the Habitat family. And then by that time, we've built a house for them, and they move in. Right. And instantly, and many of them say this, maybe all of them, their lives change dramatically. Right. Because the opportunity for that type of housing just really wasn't there for them without something like Habitat.
Yeah. Wow. And how many, I don't know whether you'll know these numbers, but how many homes or how many families do you hope to help each year?
It's a couple of hundred each year. It's a one house at a time. We're building more than one house at a time, but it's a definite personal interaction type of program. And we rely so much on volunteers to help build the houses. And, frankly, right now we're, at least as of the end of July, we weren't building houses with volunteers because we don't want to have groups, even if it's outdoors, because of COVID-19. So the pandemic has dramatically affected the Habitat model, but we're still building houses with staffers, just maybe a little fewer.
Sure. Well, this has been fascinating, Mark. Now, what I'd like to maybe tap into is this process that you went through, working out charities, fulfilling work, etc., and maybe some of the questions that you could, here at in my role as a financial planner, that we do help people move into retirement by having a facilitated conversation around really about what's important to people before we start addressing the money. But I'm very interested to know that your advice maybe to people who we don't serve, but who are listening to this podcast, to go, maybe they're 1 or 2 years out of retiring or leaving their profession, and moving on to this next stage or this next season, as you nicely put it. What are the things that you would advise them to be doing, or the questions they should be asking themselves?
Well, I would start with not retiring from what you're doing, but retiring into something that you're passionate about. Steve Jobs had this quote that I also love, that and I'll paraphrase again, but something, and I'll probably revert to my Queens, New York vernacular, if you ain't got the passion, it ain't going to work. And so it's important to sit down and honestly have a discussion with the facilitator and yourself about what you want, what do you like, what do you find fulfilling. And for some people, that's family. And that's great. For some people, it's switching up to do things like I was doing, like I am doing. But I think it is important to not focus so much on breaking the tether to what you're that has you connected to what you're currently doing, as much as moving into the what will I do to be fulfilled. Because we all live longer now, certainly than our parents or our grandparents. And when you break that tether, you're looking at potentially decades in front of you during which you're healthy. And what I wouldn't want to do, and what I would advise people to give some serious thought to, is not figuring all of that out after you break the tether, but have your plan in place so that you slide into this next season gracefully rather than shotgun. So in other words, don't do what I did coming out of college and not have a really good idea what I was going to do with my career. And in the book, I tend to, because I don't think I'm an expert and everybody is different, I don't tend to offer a ton of advice, although if people can read the book and find some simpatico, that's wonderful. But there is one chapter where I kind of go through the 10 things that I ended up doing to try to identify. And for me, again, this is me, I learned that my law firm wasn't going to help me figure this out, that my family and friends really weren't going to help figure this out. A facilitator would. It is something to go to a professional, because it's not a simple process. And so one of my rules was feel free to seek help. You go to the doctor when you're sick, you should find somebody that has the expertise to listen to your life and probe what your passions are, and then help direct, guide, or steer you. And then, when is it time? And that's another really interesting one. There wasn't the aha moment. And I don't, from the people I've talked to that have gone through this, many of them don't have that aha moment where the light bulb goes off and you wake up that morning, you say, okay, now's the day. It doesn't happen that way. And for me, I just knew, I can't define when it was, when that moment was, but, you trust yourself to sort of just know. You certainly have to figure out the finances of it. That's another thing. It's if you're going to move into the world where you're not really being paid for what you do. And by the way, if you don't go to an interview and ask what's the pay, it's incredible how many things in the world there are that you can do. The world's in desperate need of people to help in so many different ways, in so many different areas. But for me, and I used a company called My Next Season, who was wonderful, and they did what you do in Great Britain. And I've talked to people about that who asked me this question, what did you do? And I tell them that I sought some professional help. And the first reaction was, you went to a psychiatrist? I said, well, not for this. And they're surprised that there's this expertise out there. Many of them go to financial planners as they go through life, but they don't think of this as something that they would ever share their innermost feelings with someone in order to seek help. And I think that's a mistake. That would be my main piece of advice.
Wow. Yeah. Wise words, Mark. I think wise words. So, what's next for Mark? I mean, what's on the horizon? Where are you going next?
I'm pretty comfortable in where I am. I think I got again lucky and found the 3 organizations that need my time, need as much of my time as I can give them, and so that's great. Like everybody else in the world, I'm hoping and praying for a vaccine so everyone can get back to some semblance of normality. And that has impacted each of the organizations to different degrees. The hit to the cities here because of no tax revenue is huge. No tax revenue means it's harder to pay our artists to go into the schools to teach the kids art. And then there's the problem that the schools are all online now. So the 3 things I'm doing now, the challenges that have been presented by COVID are so dramatic that I don't see myself adding a 4th thing for a while. I did start to write my 4th book, which will be a complete change from what I've done. It's going to be fiction, a bankruptcy novel. I did try to search on Amazon to see if there were other bankruptcy novels before I started to outline this project, and I can't find any. That may be because no one would ever read a bankruptcy novel. I don't know, but so I'm keeping the writing aspect, which I very much enjoy. It's quite rigorous. It really provides a lot of structure.
Great.
Yeah. So I love that. And I still have my art, my photography, and I still have my music, and then all of these things, and staying out of my wife's hair, and the whole thing seems to be working. And I think I have convinced myself that no one is coming for me to drag me back to the law firm. And that's a good thing. There was a period right after retirement that I felt like the three gentlemen that escaped from the Alcatraz prison in San Francisco, or if they made it to land, that they must have been looking over their shoulder for that U.S. Marshal that was coming after them. And I felt that way about the law firm, but that's passed, and the euphoria has passed. Euphoria is not a good thing for being organized. It's an interesting it's an interesting emotion, and not one that many lawyers have during their career. So when I left the practice and moved into the euphoria phase, I didn't get anything done. But that's passed, and I feel very productive, and I do feel lucky. Very lucky.
Wow, brilliant. Well, Mark, thank you so much for rising early to talk to me this afternoon here in the UK. I'll put all the show notes about your books and the charities that you support, etc., in the show notes. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I really enjoyed it, and I think there's lots of wisdom in your, and just like that, essays on a life before, during, and after the law. And thanks once again for joining me this afternoon.
Okay, thank you, and good luck, and be safe.
So until next time, this is Justin King, helping you feel more informed in your retirement.